Hello everyone, and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James, and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece. If any of that sounds interesting to you, then please feel free to give this video a thumbs up, and to subscribe to my channel to see more content like this. And what are we talking about today? Well, today we are going to be talking about the newest album from the gent/metalcore band ERRA, their self-titled album by the same name. I have been so excited to talk about this band on my channel. I've talked about them in passing a couple of times on previous videos of mine, but now I finally get to talk about them as a band in full. And man, is this one of my top 10 favorite bands of all time. I absolutely love them as a group and what they do. They are very innovative in their genre, and I would say they are one of the leading people for this new version of gent that has come about. ERRA's albums, all of them are really good to varying degrees. White Noise was a really solid debut that I really enjoyed, and Augment, their second album, was already a masterwork, nearly pitch perfect in every way, and really showed the band going in innovative, risky directions that not many bands like them would take. Still an album that impresses me to this day. And then you've got their newer two albums, which I would say take them in a bit more of an accessible direction while still keeping their sound intact, which is always the markings of a good band. And I think that Drift does this slightly better out of the newer two albums of theirs. I still do really enjoy that album and think it's pretty great for modern era. And while Neon was a bit of a continuation of the sound on Drift, and perhaps is what I would call ERRA's safest album, it still has some interesting elements on it, and one of their best songs ever in Breach, still a song that I just can't get enough of. So, of course, I was extremely excited for ERRA's new project. They are one of the bands that I always anticipate what they're going to do next, because they never necessarily do the same thing twice. And this album, the lead singles were showing them going in a very different direction, especially on the song House of Glass, which was just wildly different for ERRA, so I was very excited to see what we got out of this album. Thematically, this might be ERRA's most intriguing album to date, as they navigate the boundary between dreams and reality, and how the two can almost even meet in some ways, and ultimately how it's the human condition sometimes to try to lean into dreams or dreamlike states rather than accepting the reality that's in front of us. But the interesting thing is that the band doesn't necessarily always frame this condition as a bad thing. Every member of the band is on a whole new level here to me, and the first song, which also happened to be the lead single of the album, Snowblood, is an immediate indicator of that. Man, is this song awesome. ERRA has always been good at openers, but even at that, Snowblood is still pretty top tier in terms of ERRA opening tracks, and that's saying a lot considering the quality that they have there. This song is just such a banger and so much fun. I just love the guitar work in this song. It goes in some really unexpected places that I haven't heard ERRA do before. There's some stuff that made my jaw drop the first time I heard this song, and it still leaves me impressed even now. The really dark atmosphere that this song begins with those dark synths, is really cool before it explodes into what is pretty much iconic ERRA, and the dark lyrics only serve to make it work even more. You get this feeling of a person deteriorating mentally, and this is the first indication we get of this conceptuality of us deteriorating in reality, so wanting to lean more on dreams and on basically living in a fiction, and it's interesting how the band highlights that here already. Gungrave continues the fun of Snowblood, and even ramps it up a little more with just a monstrous guitar riff that begins off this song, and you get the feeling that this person in this song is spiraling downward even more. And it's just such a horrifying atmosphere that this song has. This is one of perhaps the darkest on the album, and we haven't even gotten to the darkest on the album yet. The first half of this album is definitely looking at dreams, or at leaning into fiction as more of a bad thing, looking at it more on the dark side, as this person is going further and further into themselves. Or maybe more conceptually, the human condition is for us to go deeper and deeper into ourselves until we lose all that humanity. And Divisionary is another warning track like that, except this one highlights it in terms of the dangers of technology. Now, for a song to have a theme of the dangers of technology, it has to do something really interesting with it, because I find this theme to usually be pretty repetitive and pretty uninteresting most of the time, but not ERRA. They do it just right in Divisionary. it is framed really well, and I think it's because of the imagery here. The imagery across the board on this album is some of the most beautiful or horrifying that I've heard from the band. It's just so descriptive and you can visualize it in your head. And Divisionary definitely does that with what is debatedly the most catchy chorus on the album. This song is probably the most accessible on the self-titled album as a whole, and I love it once again. While I don't like House of Glass as much as Snowblood as far as the two lead singles go, I still really do think this is the first song where we see some primary risk-taking that ERRA is going to do on the rest of this album. Instead of using guitars as a primary experimental gesture in this song, they actually use a combination of electronics and drum work that is really interesting. There is some super intense drum work in here that I think might go unnoticed if you're not paying attention. This song is definitely fitting in its anger, as it talks about perhaps the rise of mental health problems and of suicide and things like that in the midst of the very polarizing world we've been living in since 2016, and especially how that polarization has been highlighted. And the band is almost like highlighting this idea that maybe the rocks we're throwing at, we're living in a house of glass ourselves and we shouldn't be the ones throwing stones. Shadow Autonomous is a absolutely heartbreaking song, as we see this human condition to let our darker parts or our darker thoughts take over and almost become its own entity. We let it take control, almost like it has its own autonomy. And that can make us go into very dark places. And I like that the band is talking about this, talking about mental health issues in this way that is very powerful and just feels almost otherworldly in a way. It gives it a lot more weight to me, but there's still these lyrics that highlight the stark reality of living with mental health issues. Lyrics like, spitting out the blood inside my mouth, the pain stings but it brings relief, that I can still feel anything at all. Electric Twilight has the word transcendence in it, and it definitely should, because this song is transcendent in every way possible, having some of the most starkly beautiful imagery that ERRA has ever penned in their lyrics. And Jesse Cash's voice in this song, wow. Wow, wow, wow. It just goes to some new heights in the chorus, and it makes you feel like you're in this ethereal place. It is beautiful. And this is the first time where we see the band talking about dreams and living in a dreamlike state in a way that's more positive, and the idea that sometimes we do need to go into dreamlike states or live in a place of idealism in order to go back to reality. We need to find a balance. But of course, after the high of Electric Twilight, we get into the low of Scorpion Hymn, which is very much so showing the nature of mental health and how sometimes you can feel like you're on this huge high, but then you go into this deep, deep low. And the band talks about violent instinct on this song, making it definitely the darkest on the album and the most intense. And man, is the intensity just mind-blowing here. It is awesome, and JTKV and the guitar work combined together to make a song that is just visceral in its attack. If you thought Electric Twilight was transcendent, then man, Lunar Halo is on an even more different level to me. It's a tough call for me as to whether Lunar Halo or the following song, Vanish Canvas, are my favorite on the album. The two are sort of connected in a way, which is fitting because they both feel like they have moonlight imagery, which is sort of giving off the metaphor of being in this dreamlike, almost ethereal state of mind, where you're finally sort of discovering parts of yourself. Both of these songs feel deep in their own way. Lunar Halo is definitely more of the one that feels almost spacious, almost like mind-blowing, like you're in the galaxy is what it feels like. It is so wonderful in its atmosphere. And then we get into Vanish Canvas, which is just a deeply human and deeply reassuring track that I absolutely love. And Jesse Cash talked about how this song was the heart of the album, and it definitely feels like it, as it is one of the most down-to-earth and genuine songs that ERRA has penned. I love the chorus and how reassuring it is almost, and the fact that even though we do want to live in dreams, and even though that can be okay sometimes, we do also need to live in reality, as they're saying, let this moment break your heart, something greater to impart. Anxieties that you try to pacify will keep you going under. Follow me to the sound, conscious soul to be found. So it's almost like this song is serving as a transition from the dream state to the reality state. If Lunar Halo was where you were in the absolute of the dream state, now Jesse Cash is pulling you out of there and guiding you back to the light. After the symbolic waking up of Vanish canvas, it's sort of fitting that Eidolon begins with the lyrics "wake up." Now we are conceptually fully awake in context of this album. Now we are in reality. But instead of looking at reality in a darker way like Snowblood or Gungrave or earlier songs did, now we're looking at reality in a much more optimistic lens. Now we're connecting with humans. As JTKV says, "With your hands place grace upon me, so I may not be forgotten, forging pages of hopes and dreams for the story I have written." Remnant is the victorious, almost conclusion of this album. This song feels absolutely epic in the heights that it reaches, and fittingly so, as the band talks about rising above obstacles, but in a way that is so uncliched and fittingly inspirational. As the band talks about the reality that you do have to face mental health struggles and other types of struggles alone, but you're going to get through them because that is what the human experience is, getting through tough stuff alone. And I love how the band continues to frame this in just a very inspiring, but ultimately very realistic way. Memory Fiction ends this album off in a very deceptively simple way. If Remnant was the more victorious, epic conclusion, then Memory Fiction is a more restrained, toned down one that I think was a very fitting way to end off this album with just Jesse Cash this time. And I'm so glad they gave Jesse a chance to sing alone on this album. I've always wanted that out of ERRA, and finally we get it, and it is wonderful to hear. And there's this feeling of reassurance here as Jesse Cash says, "Our origins grow hazy, who am I kidding? I can't recall what I felt in the beginning. My life is my story, it's my jurisdiction, and I'm allowed to grieve you in my memory fiction. Memory fiction. Love that we left behind." And so we finally get here sort of a revealing of what this album has ultimately been about. In the midst of dreams and reality and the divide between the two, there's also been a meditation on grief. Whether it's the grief of losing yourself or of losing a loved one, that can ultimately make you want to lean into either abandoning yourself in the dark hazes of fiction, or going into the darkest recesses of reality and not being able to find an escape between the two. You can remember a person in ways that almost feel dreamlike, but you also know who the person was in reality. And that can also be reflected back onto yourself and who you are and what you are as a person. What a beautiful statement that is so complex and so just completely interesting to think about. And I still feel like I haven't tapped into the recesses of what this album has to say fully yet. There's still so much more that I'm sure this album is trying to say in the midst of its very complex lyrics and complex musicality. I know I've talked about the lyrics a lot, and I've talked about the musicality some. I just want to highlight again that musically, this album is also incredible. The guitar work in this album, just mind-blowing. So many great breakdowns, so many great guitar solos. The drum work, just incredibly talented. The drummer goes absolutely underrated in this band, especially as songs like House of Glass will show you exactly what he's capable of. This album, oh man, I think I could go on and on about it. This is absolutely, in my opinion, ERRA's best work to date. It takes out one of the main problems of their older albums, which was that they felt a little repetitive in some places, and this album is varied, very much so. There's so much different things going on here, making this ERRA's most diverse album to date, and lyrically, absolutely their best written. The band is on a whole new level here, and they deserved to call this album their self-titled because this is ERRA at their absolute best. This is what they are capable of. This is the heights of their achievement. For that reason, this album is getting a perfect 5 out of 5 stars for me. Talk about an incredible, incredible album. So yeah, that was my review of ERRA's self-titled. What were your thoughts on it? If you haven't heard it, I definitely recommend you check it out. You will not be disappointed. So yeah, once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece. If any of that sounds interesting to you, then once again, I'd appreciate it if you gave this video a like and subscribe to my channel to check out future content. But until then, I will see you all in the next video.